So in general, we're going to be talking about unemployment taxes, but like I said, we're not going to really dig into SUTA until we get to the Montana section of the class because I want it to be, specific to our state. So we're just going to do some really broad brush overview today on SUTA. So we know that FUTA and SUTA are both employer taxes. FUTA is only employer, but in some states, SUTA is also paid by employees, and I think we saw that with in Pennsylvania, right? That it was like 0.007 or something. So it's different in each state, and that's where you get the funds for the benefits, and that's where the taxes go into for SUTA. So if I'm applying for unemployment, I don't apply to the feds, I apply to the state. So everybody has to pay FUTA if they pay $1,500 or more of wages in any quarter of the current year, right? So even if you're pretty small, or if you employ one or more persons in one day in each of 20 weeks in current or prior year. In other words, it's like even if I only have like my little fruit stand open one day a week for 20 weeks, then I've still got to pay it, even if I don't get to the $1,500. There's special rules if you're agricultural or household. So if you've got somebody working in your home, like a cook or a nanny or a chef or something like that, a gardener, you have to pay FICA, you have to withhold FIT, you have to pay FUTA, you have to issue W-2s. Most people don't know that, and B, if they do, they choose not to know it because it's really a colossal payment. But okay, who's covered? Basically everybody.
Lisa, that 1,500, that's not just for that quarter.
It is.
It wouldn't be for the entire year.
It isn't. It's $1,500 or more in any quarter of the current year. Or if you've got one person working one day a week for 20 or more weeks, then you're liable for that. So say you just open up to sell peaches for 2 weeks in August, and you don't ever get to the $1,500, you don't have to pay food on those people. It's a tiny tax anyway, so it barely matters, but it's more like a compliance piece of the thing. A pool. And then you would be paying food on your pool. Oh. That is quite a visual.
Well, not just that poor boy.
Yeah, anybody that works in your home, and then you file this thing called a Schedule H, which stands for household employees, and you attach it to your own 1040.
And is that for employees, or is that?
It's for everybody. So if you only have one person, you file a Schedule H. If you have a staff of 8 people in your villa, you file a Schedule H.
Okay, that's not 1,500 per person.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're back to this. No, that's cute. That's collective wages.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's pretty much like everybody pays food unless you're like the little peach stand example. You just, or like my buddy that does Christmas trees for 2 weeks. It's just this tiny snapshot. The wages aren't very much. He just hires some kids basically to help him haul the trees and set them up. And although I'm so sad that's going away, the corner of Reserve and South, have you ever been down there by Rose Hours? They brought all those beautiful trees, and like at Christmas that transformed into this beautiful tree farm and a sea of asphalt. And now it's a freaking gas station. I mean, it's for 25 years I've lived there, and every year it's like, oh, it's so cool. It's like this tree farm in the middle of asphalt, and now it's like a gas station. Oh, well. Nobody consulted me. Huh? Oh, I'm totally. In fact, I was just listening to that the other day. Yeah, some things never change. Okay, so who isn't covered under FUTA? And I think we've talked about this before. Partners in partnerships are not employees of their company. So that's sort of an Internal Revenue Code distinction. They're partners, not employees. So they're not covered. If you have a board of directors, they're not covered. You can read this book. Foreign students, exchange visitors, independent contractors, obviously, people that work at home. So I pay you guys all to sit at home and stuff envelopes for my marketing endeavor. I have to pay food up, full-time life insurance, railroad folks, and kids under 21 working for their parents' business. So that's the list of specific exceptions. Basically, if you're covered under FUTA, you're covered under SUTA. You do have to be aware of this thing at the bottom called the ABC test. In other words, you don't have to pay SUTA if all of these tests are met, but this really is just the definition of what? Read through those and tell me what that's the definition of, basically. That's an independent contractor, right? It's free from control, is work performed outside the usual course of business. I'm not in the business of, I'm a medical device company and you come and do all my landscaping and building maintenance. That's not what I'm in the business of doing. And you're customarily employed as an independent contractor. So obviously at that point, I'm not paying suit on you. This is a big question. This is a big issue. Interstate employees are people that work in multiple states for one business. So let me give you an example. Like I have a client that's a log liner, and he works he works in the Scapegoats down in Idaho. He logs in southwestern Montana, but he bids out of his house here essentially. His home office. So where do we pay unemployment, right? So he's got some guys in Idaho, he's got some people here. What do we do? So here's how you try and figure out where you pay your SUTA to. With multi-state employees, so his crews are going back and forth, right? Sometimes a question arises as to which state the employer is liable in. So to decide, you have to apply these 4 bullets in the following order. Where is the work localized? Meaning, where is the work primarily performed? This is the most compelling criterion. Well, that didn't help us at all because he works between McCall and Sula. So McCall's Idaho, Sula, Montana. So that's not helpful. Where is the operational base located? Well, I thought that was going to do it for us because he's got, he basically works out of his house. But he set up a second headquarters or localized area to run his McCall crew. And he keeps business records there, and he runs his payroll for his McCall crew out of there. So that wasn't helpful. And I go to the third one, where are the operations directed? And that's basically what gave me my answer because he directs the work out of his home here in Missoula. So it's like, okay, that's where we're paying SUTA to. But do you see how you kind of have to go down that list? And if that hadn't told me, in other words, if he had somebody who was doing all of his bidding and everything also in Idaho, then we would have deferred to the fourth one, which is where do each of the employees live? In which case there, we would be paying 2 sets of SUTA. You don't want to do that. We've got a company here in Missoula named ALPS, Attorney Liability Protection Services, really giant business, $50 million business, headquartered in the Florence building downtown. And they sell attorney liability protection insurance in 38 states. So guess what? When you go down this list, you could potentially have 38 SUTA reports to do. And I know their CFO, and they do have 38 SUTA reports to do. So that's, all of a sudden now you've got a really huge payroll issue, right?
So they have people in all this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you get one.
No, it goes in that order. So you apply those questions in those following orders. So like with ALPS, where is the work localized? South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, and Alabama, and da-da-da-da-da. Where is the operational base located? Well, they've got people in all 38 states that have a physical presence that maintain their own underwriters, their own, systems, etc. where are the operations directed? Well, again, it's not all directed out of Missoula. It just happens to be where the headquarters are. But every single state has got its own, branch office, so to speak. So then you're down to number 4, where do the employees live? And now you've got 38 SUDA reports to file every quarter.
You can't qualify that further. You can't say, well, our headquarters is here.
It's not, because it's not really directed out of here. Things like quotas or strategic planning for the company as a whole comes out of here, but each branch manager has his or her own discretion how they direct their operations. How do they go out and approach their local attorneys? How do they make their sales pitch? And then of course you've got you sell very different insurance to an attorney in Mississippi than you do in Montana, because we have, different, state statutes. And some states are more liberal, some are more conservative. And so as far as, for malpractice litigation and things like that, so I'm sure like the terms of the policies are really different. I mean, I'm just speculating. I don't really know that much about the field, but.
That's why we have to have those offices.
Yeah, absolutely. So if the factors from the prior slide do not yield appropriate answer, you can enter into an arrangement called an interstate reciprocal coverage agreement. But not all states are willing to do this. Now, Montana and North Dakota have done it because there's so much in eastern Montana and western North Dakota, there's so much work back and forth, maybe not so much anymore, but 5-7 years ago in the Bakken, right? So employees would be, at a drill site in western North Dakota, and then the next month they'd be on a drill site in eastern Montana. So Montana and North Dakota fashioned an interstate reciprocal coverage agreement whereby you only have to pay to one state. So the way that works is, say there's a North Dakotan that's working for a company that's paying SUTA to Montana. If they become unemployed, then they're drawing from Montana's bank. Okay, but it's 2 states that specifically go in and say, we're going to do this together because we've got this really huge issue like I just described. Okay. So food is, the wage base is $7,000 a year. We know that. It's been that forever. It doesn't change. It's based on your actual cash wages rather than your wages payable. We know that as well. And the SUTA wage base is different in every state. What is our SUTA wage base for Montana?
6.2.
The dollar amount. The wage base dollar. What is it again?
$30.
Okay, you tell me. Honestly, it changes every year, and I'm dealing with so many different years in my head. As I think it's 32,000 exactly for 2017. Is that the numbers for 2017? Okay. Again, it's so weird because like this, I'm dealing with 2017. We're in 2018, so my clients that I'm dealing with right now are 2018 numbers, and I'm working with my editors writing slides for 2019 textbooks. So honestly, if somebody asks me what a cap is on something, I'm like, yeah, hold on a second, I'll look that up. Nothing particularly interesting here. Wages are just like we've studied on FICA and FIT. They're sort of everything. Bonus, tips, severance, retro, etc. What kinds of payments are specifically excluded for FUTA? Any retirement pay, if your employer pays your tuition, strike benefits, meals and lodging, and again, we've seen this laundry list before. Okay, the only thing that's kind of weird about this is right here. So this, first off, let's start with this bottom right number. That's the only number you've ever seen, is the 0.6%, right? So that's 0.006 is how that goes in your calculator. So if if you guys all worked for me, 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll put Owen on the payroll, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people. If you guys all worked for me and I paid you 40 grand a year, what would my FUTA cost be? So there's 9 of you. What would my total FUTA cost be for the year?
7,000 times 9.
Times
Times the
0.006, right? 42 times 9, $360 odd dollars. Okay, easy peasy. Except for, that's not where it begins and ends. The way FUTA really works is it starts with this gross FUTA rate. I honestly never knew this until I started teaching the class. So when I was in practice, before I became an educator, all I'd ever seen was that 0.6. And when I was in the private sector, before I was an educator, there wasn't the issue that I'm going to explain to you right now. So here's how it really works. This is your gross FUTA rate. Okay. Then you have this thing called a SUTA credit of 5.4, which leads you to a net SUTA rate of 0.6, right? Okay, so great. This SUTA credit is not dependent on your SUTA rate for your company. It's called a SUTA, so we're talking, this is FUTA. But this is the SUTA credit. But it doesn't matter, it's not reflective of what your SUTA rate is. You might be in a company with super high turnover and your SUTA rate is 5.8. And you might be in a company with super low turnover and your SUTA rate is 1.1. Doesn't matter. That's not what's relevant. Everybody starts with this blanket SUTA credit. But this credit can be impacted by 2 things. And if this credit's impacted, then obviously, mathematically, the net is going to be impacted as well. The 2 things that can impact the SUTA credit is if you pay your SUTA late. So if you're paying your SUTA late, this credit can go down, which makes this go up. So I have seen that. The second thing that's happened a lot the last decade with the Great Recession was if you're in a state that runs out of unemployment money, which happened all over the country. I mean, Arizona, California, Nevada, Florida, Michigan, right? Because there's so many people unemployed and so few employers paying in. If you're in a state that runs out of unemployment money, you can't just tell your people in Michigan, oh, sorry, we ran out of money. You go to the federal government and you borrow money. It's called Title 12. And then you borrow that money from the federal government to pay your unemployment to your people, and then you have 2 years to start paying back the feds. And if you don't pay the feds back, then every year they're going to change this credit by 0.3%. So we have like 12 states that were in Title 12 default during the recession. So say in 2000, I mean, I think Michigan was the first to take a Title 12 in like 2009. So they had 2 years to start paying it back by 2011. 2011, they can't start paying it back. And I don't know if you remember this, but also during the Great Recession, people's benefits have always been pretty much 6 months. They were extended. Remember that? They were extended to 12 and then 18 months for people that were unemployed because there were no jobs to be had. So then in 2012, Michigan's SUTA credit went down to 5.1. So then, obviously, this went up to 0.9. And then they still didn't pay it back in 2013. So then it went down to 4.8. And this guy went up to 1.2, right? And that was all reflected on something called a Schedule B that you attach to your annual FUTA tax return. I think there's only still one state left in default. I can't even remember off the top of my head what it is. I think it may be Arizona. Anyways.
The Schedule B is what the state submits?
No, and we'll go into that a little bit more. The Schedule B is, no, that's a federal. It's a federal attachment to a Form 940, but you don't really know what that is yet, so, but I'll go through that. So do you understand how that works? So basically, this is what that says. If you haven't paid your SUTA on time, your credit's going to be impacted. If you haven't, if you're in Title 12 default, your credit's going to be impacted. That's basically those 3 slides just explain what I just told you. Okay, so again, not going to spend a ton of time on SUTA because I have a whole lesson about that as pertains to Montana. But basically, just some overview. SUTA works like really any insurance pool. Everybody pays into it based on an actuarial computation, and then you get paid out if you need to receive funds out of it. So every employer has his or her own rate, and it's based upon something called the experience rating. And then also this bottom bullet, how do I know what I'm going to pay out of the chute? You have no idea what my turnover is going to look like or what my wage base is going to look like. I'm brand new. So it depends upon what industry sector you're in. You'll be assigned a rate for the first year. So for example, if you come out and say, I'm going to be I'm going to open a company that does hydrology and water sampling, and you say I'm going to open a fast food restaurant, you're going to have very different rates out of the chute, because the assumption is you're going to have pretty high-level professionals in your company and not have a ton of turnover. And if you're opening a fast food restaurant, it's implicit that there's probably going to be turnover, right? So then I'm just going to assign you a rate for a year and see how it goes if I'm the state, and then I'm going to make adjustments based on what really happened. Maybe you have an amazing fast food restaurant and you treat your people great and they don't want to leave. So just on the same vein, I'm going to jump down to this third bullet. So experience rating is based on 2 things. One is something called a reserve ratio formula, and one is whether you're a positive or negative balance employer. So let me go through each of those. And so this is the numbers are different in each state, but the concept's the same. So a reserve ratio is basically how is the whole state doing? So for example, right now, do you think that Montana would have a good reserve ratio or a bad reserve ratio? No, actually it's really good right now because we're up at full employment. We have a ton of employers paying in and very few people claiming. Right? So the state's in a really good position. So actuarially, do you know that word, actuary? Anybody know what that is?
I don't know what that is.
An actuary makes accountants look like they don't know what numbers are. So an actuary has to become an actuary. It's called actuarial science. You have a PhD in mathematics or statistics. And there's actuaries behind anything that has a pooled fund concept, i.e. insurance. So what actuaries do is they do all the modeling for how much money do you need to pay in to stay solvent for future potential payouts, and it's based on risk. So if I'm insuring all of your lives, I'm going to look at how old you are, and are you male or female, and do you smoke or do you not smoke, and what's your age, and I might even, if I'm really tapped in, I might have you guys all do physicals and throw your blood pressure and your body mass index and all those things into the calculation, and I'm going to come out with like, boom, you need to each pay this much, right? So we have that for everything. There's an actuary behind workers' compensation. There's an actuary behind SUTA, right? There's an actuary behind any insurance. So what I'm saying is the rates, whatever rates we've determined for SUTA have to be actuarially sound. In other words, if I'm an employer paying into SUTA, my anticipation is if I have mass layoffs, you guys are all going to get unemployment. I don't have a pool of my money sitting in there because it's a pooled fund, but I'm hoping somebody did the math to make sure there's money to pay y'all out, right? So, and like, let me, go ahead. Sure. Yeah.
And your job, then it's previous employer's rate that's affected by another job.
Right. It's the employer you work for that you're claiming against. And we're going to learn in the SUDA section that, which is a very common misconception. It's like, oh, I go to work for, 6 weeks at Arby's and then something happens, I get laid off. You can't claim against Arby's for the 6 weeks you work there. It's this concept called base, what is it called? Your base period or your base, I can't remember exactly what the terminology is, but you can't claim for the quarter you're in, and you can't claim for the quarter before the quarter you're in. It's the 4 quarters before that. So it's a really long time. So if I got laid off today, what are we in October? So we're in the 4th quarter of 2018. I couldn't claim against the University of Montana for the 4th quarter of 2018. I couldn't claim against the University of Montana for the 3rd quarter of 2018. It would have to be if I was employed in the 2nd and 1st quarter of 2018 and the 4th and 3rd quarter of 2017. That would be the period they would look at my wages to calculate. So if I had just come on, say last February, I've only got 2 months of wages posted to my account against the University of Montana. Okay? And that's standard everywhere. Again, the numbers are really different. And my benefits are going to look real different in New Mexico than they are in New Jersey. But the concept's the same. So that's one thing, the reserve ratio formula. In Montana, they have 10 schedules, and the actuary tells them, which schedule do you need all of your employers to be paying from? Right now, we're in Schedule 1, which is the lowest rates, because we have such a high reserve ratio. But in the height of the recession, we were paying off of Schedule 7, because for obvious reasons. Go ahead.
So, this, with that 6-month period, those 2 quarters that you can't claim on, would that be kind of the same as many employers, like, probationary period, if that's 6 months?
Sure.
So that when if you do claim, you can claim unemployment?
So I think for an employee, I mean, it is the same time period. I don't know that those are congruent concepts. I have a probationary period to make sure that you're going to culturally fit, and I don't have to worry about employee litigation if I let you go in that time period. The unemployment, regardless of what I call you, it doesn't matter. I mean, if I bring you in on day 1 and you're like full-time, and that's great, and 4 months later I lose a contract and I have to let you go, probationary or not probationary, you're not going to get unemployment from me. You may be able to claim against a prior employer, but you would have had to have been let go from them, not quit. Right? So a lot of people don't realize that.
A lot of times, this is what I've heard, is if you hire an employee, it's probably bad advice, and they make a claim, you should just let them.
It's horrible
It's
advice.
risking.
Horrible advice.
Suing you for like wrongful firing.
Okay, first off, I retract what I just said. It may be good advice in certain scenarios. If there is something that looks potentially litigious, you would need to weigh the cost of litigation. But I mean, on that piece of advice, you fire 2 people that have been grossly incompetent or embezzling from you or mucking up your specs and making your customers very, very unhappy and ruining your press, your PR, and you let them go and you've documented all this, blah, 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 and you just let them claim unemployment, your student rate is going to be impacted for all of your employees. I mean, that could cost you thousands of dollars a year in additional student. And then it takes quite a long time to move that rate back up.
I thought it was bad advice.
That's somebody that's been involved in employee litigation.
Or they didn't document the firing, why it all happened.
That would be most of that. probably the most explicable of that reason. Yeah. No, you need to be on top of your game, documenting if you have problems, even if you don't have problems. You need an employee handbook. You need to be documenting what's going on in your company. You need to be having people that maybe are problematic signing that they've received warnings. And then you've got your T's, crossed and your I's dotted. No, you're not going to let them claim unemployment against you and have your rate go up.
We say if I only worked one day in the quarter beyond the previous
Right.
quarter, then that's what I would claim
Yeah, but you're going to get about 86 cents a week in unemployment because your wages posted for that whole quarter is, $186.
if I worked, say, one day in that quarter that qualified.
Yeah.
The rest of it is somebody else.
So that's where it gets tricky. Why did you leave that somebody else? Were you fired from them? Were you let go for due to lack of work from them? Did you quit? So you may potentially be able to claim from that prior, but it depends on how you left them.
If I was laid off, like, for business reasons.
Certainly, and you may have a claim. Yeah. Okay, and then the second piece of this is, are you a positive balance or negative balance employer? And that refers, so the first one refers to the whole state of Montana, right? The reserve ratio formula I just explained. The second thing does refer specifically to you. So are you positive balance? In other words, in the last, I think the look back period is what I just explained, not this quarter or last quarter, but before that. In your look back period, did the amount that you paid in exceed the claims that were claimed against your account? Then you're a positive balance. Even though it's not your pool of money sitting there, they do the calculation. Or in that time period was the amount of SUTA that you paid in less than the amount of claims we paid out. Then the actuary is going to say, ooh, you're a negative balance employer. That means that actuarially we need to raise your rates, right? Because we're paying out more. If you're a positive balance employer, I can modify your rates down. So and this is what the statisticians do, is put all that in their models.
I think I know someone who just got a refund check because they
Overcharged?
were, I thought it was because they were positive balance.
Probably. Yep. This is what I just said. Okay, this is, I've never actually really seen this before I started teaching this, but now that I'm made aware of it, there's a whole mathematical computation about it that makes sense, which is if you make voluntary contributions to SUTA, you can buy down your rate to the next actuarial level. So for example, say I'm paying 3.1%, and I have 200 grand a year of taxable wage base. And I want to buy that down to 2.8%. There's a number at which I can contribute additional cash to buy down that rate to the next level. And that might be beneficial to you, right? So we're not going to do the math around it, but just be aware. So if you make another $2,500 in contributions, voluntary contributions to your student this year, you can buy down your rate to 2.8 for the next year. So obviously there's some math to be done that exactly what is that 0.3% buy down on 200 grand, what does that work?
Have you had any?
I've never seen anyone do that. So nonprofits, my husband's actually the CFO of the youth homes, and they do this. So they choose not to pay into SUTA, but instead they reimburse the state directly for any claims against their account. So my husband's done the math on it, and they've got 180 employees, and he knows what their history of claims are, and then he knows what rate they'd be given. And he's like, it saves the youth homes 30 grand a year just to directly because they have a really tight recruiting and retention and training program. They don't have much turnover. But youth homes traditionally have a lot of turnover because it's not that highly paid. Social work, it requires a degree, but it's not that highly paid, so usually it's like a transition to another career. Anyways, without going into all that, again, it's just a mathematical computation based on your historical performance. And then this, SUDA Dumping Prevention Act, this sounds sort of a funny name, but what that refers to is like, say that I have a company with horrific turnover and tons of claims, and I've got a really, really high rate, like 5.9%, right? And I really want to get out from underneath that. So I'm just going to start another company that's very similar, shut down this one and move you guys all over there so I get a new employer rate for my industry sector. So it's like 2.5 percentage points less. Yes. Yep, whole thing, and just like, I gotta get out from underneath the 6% SUDA rate, it's killing me. My industry sector comes in as a new employer at 3.1, so I shut you guys down, I move you all over here, you don't see any difference, it's just a new company. That's dumping your SUDA rate, and that's illegal. Huh? So, let's try this. So, Sumatra Imports is based in New Mexico. They have a SUDA tax rate of 4.2% with a taxable SUDA wage base of $24,300 for each employee. And then their FUTA taxable wages were $109,500 and their SUDA taxable wages were $298,700. So, the only reason I'm doing this is just to show you can't assume that the FUTA and SUDA rates are the same. It's confusing because a lot of states have a $7,000 cap on SUDA. So if you look at those states, you're like, oh, it's the same number. Well, no, it's not. You have to go to page 512 and 513 in your book and look up the cap for whatever state you're talking about. And lots of them are much higher than 7,000. I don't think any are lower, but there's a number of states that are exactly 7,000. So then students say, oh, it's the same number. No, it's not. Okay. Basically that. Okay, I'm going to give about another probably 5 minutes, and then I'm going to ask you to print some forms for Friday, because on Friday we're going to practice filling out the Form 940, which is the FUTA tax return. So, you only file a 940 once a year. How often do we file our 941s? Yeah, 4 times a year, right? So this is just an annual tax return because the tax is so much smaller, right? It's due by Jan 31 of the next year. You need to attach a Schedule A. Oh, I said a Schedule B, sorry. It's a Schedule A. If you operate in more than one state, so the example I just gave you of my log liner or the driller, in eastern Montana, or if you have your SUDA credit reduced. Can somebody go look on page 525 in their book, and is that a Schedule A?
Yes.
Okay, so for our purposes, you need to know what a Schedule A is, and that you have to file it if you operate in more than one state, or if you're in a state that has a SUDA credit reduction because you haven't paid back your Title 12 funds. One state. Yeah, Cali. The only state, is that the only check mark? Yeah, the only state, sorry. Oh, okay. So 2 states are still in Title 12 default, California and Pennsylvania. So if you're an employer in those states, you're in a credit reduction scenario. So everybody in California and everybody in Pennsylvania, employers, have to have a Schedule A attached to their 940. For our purposes, we're not going to do that just because we're not in a credit reduction state, and hopefully you're all going to go to work for companies that pay their SUDA on time. So this shouldn't be an issue. And you file it with the district center in which you're located, which in Montana, that's Ogden, Utah. That's this right here. Your SUTA credit's going down. Your SUTA credit goes down, so your FUTA paid goes up, your net rate. You can be granted an extension of time. This is I mean, I don't know why you would need an extension of time on your FUTA, but this is just the first bullet. It's a really important concept in general that's difficult sometimes for clients to understand. Getting an extension to file a tax return does not give you an extension to pay your taxes. So if you come to me, whether it's a FUTA tax return or or your individual income taxes or your corporate tax return or whatever it is, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have my books together, can you do an extension? Sure, I can do an extension. And then you're like, oh, phew. And I'm like, but we still need to send in a payment with your extension based on just what we sort of think you're going to need to pay. So I've still got to do some calculation like, what were your revenues last year? 1.3 million. What do you think your expenses were? And then you're like, I said my books aren't together. Well, then I'll just use the prior year's expenses. And then I'm going to have to calculate a number, and you're still going to have to write a check. If you don't do that, they'll still accept your extension, but you're going to get a penalty for late payment. And if it's a lot of tax, it's going to be a lot of penalty. You can also amend your 940, and then in the very last year that you do business, you have to file a final return. We're going to go through all this together, so I'm not going to sit up here and read this to you. We're going to do a 940 together. The only other thing you need to know is the deposit rules, which is different very different from FICA and FIT. So FICA and FIT, let's just do a quick review. So how often do you have to deposit FICA and FIT? Okay, that's one option. That's another option. The answer to my question is, it depends. How often do you have to file 941 taxes? It depends. It depends upon what the IRS told you. And there's two basic types and then two exceptions. What are the two basic types? Monthly, which is what? If you're monthly, you have to deposit by 15th of the following month. Or they tell you you're semi-weekly. Yeah? If you pay Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, you got to deposit by the next Wednesday. You pay Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, you got to deposit by the next Friday. Then there's the exceptions. If you're really small, you can pay quarterly. If you have more than $100,000 to payroll taxes, you got to pay the next day. So that's a pretty complicated answer. Food is super straightforward. You don't have to deposit till you get to $500. And if you don't get to $500 all year, you just send it in with your 940. Okay? All right, let me go show you where to get your 941. I want you to, well, you know how to, why don't you tell me? Where do we go to get tax forms? Yep, irs.gov. And I think you can just go up to forms and instructions. And then just key in what you're looking for. And here it is. And you need to print it's a 2017 return, you need to print the first 2 pages twice. Okay? So that is what you need to do for Friday, and then Monday all the homework for Chapter 5 will be due.
For Monday?
For Monday, yep.